Hey guys, it's Percolator. Today I'm going to start a video series on how to get started with a home lab. When I started, I ran into some problems that hopefully I can help you avoid, like buying the wrong hardware. The goal is by the end of the series that you'll have a base home lab that then you can use to build on top of. Things like study for certifications or serve media to your friends and family. Anything that you can really imagine to self-host is kind of the idea here. In this video, we're going to start by looking into the basic software and hardware you need in order to start your home lab. This is not a definitive list. This is just what I have experience with and things that I know that you should look out for. Things like CMR versus SMR and hardware, as in server hardware versus commodity like consumer grade hardware, stuff like that. And what you should really be looking for in that kind of hardware. Also, what software you should use. Things like what distros to look out for. Things like if you want to get your hands super dirty versus if you just want something out of the box that will work for you, that you don't have to play with a ton. But yeah, so that's the idea for today's video. The first tool that we're going to be looking at is Bintoy, a new bootable USB solution. What does this mean? The old solution was that what people would do is you would go to a big box store, you'd buy 4 or 5 USBs. They'd all be SanDisk, and you would chunk a different ISO on each one of them, and that would be how you would boot, say, Arch Linux, and then Windows, and then FreeBSD, and then Ubuntu. Or you would have one USB, and every time you need to boot something different, you would burn it and have to reburn it every time that you need to boot something different. Bintoy gets rid of this issue by making it so that you need one large USB, or larger USB, and then you chunk all your ISOs on it, and then you can boot from any of those ISOs whenever you plug in that USB. You plug it in, you select Bintoy, Bintoy pops up with its own menu, you select what ISO or image you want to boot, and then it boots it. It's very useful, it's a very good tool. It's 100% open source, it's very simple to use. On Windows, it has an installer, and it's very easy. On Linux, it's pretty easy to get installed there too. Overall, it's a very good tool, and if there's a need for a video, I will make one on it, and we can go into some of the features that Bintoy offers other than just simply booting. The next tool that we want to look at is Rufus. Rufus is the gold standard, I guess. When I first got started with Home Lab, it was what everybody suggested because Bintoy either wasn't out or was very early on at that point. And what it allows you to do is it is the old method. You plug in one USB, you burn one ISO to that USB, and then now you're able to boot it. It's rock solid. It's worked every time I've ever used it. There's some older solutions that I always had issues with, but Rufus has always worked for me. It's if something weird happens in Bintoy, which I haven't had happen yet, then Rufus is my backup. The last tool that is a bootable is DD. DD is very useful if you are a Linux user. If you're a Linux user, I highly suggest learning DD. It is useful for so much more than just making ISOs. You can use it to make bit-for-bit copies of files or entire drives, I believe. You can do a ton with DD. DD is a Unix philosophy style tool where it does one job really, really well. So DD is a very good tool, and I highly recommend learning it. Even if you don't use it a ton for making flash drives, it is very good for other things as well. The next piece of software we're going to be looking at is Proxmox. Proxmox is what we're going to be using as our hypervisor. Proxmox is based off of KVM and Debian. KVM is the hypervisor, Debian is the distribution. KVM is widely used in Linux virtualization, and in this case, the reason why we're using Proxmox over just using pure KVM is because Proxmox holds your hands a little bit more than pure KVM would. It has a UI, it's very pretty, it works well, you can click on the buttons to add things instead of having to know the commands, and it's generally a little bit better for newer users. Not to say that it is useless for advanced users. It has some very advanced features like Ceph and clustering, which can be very useful when you get into more advanced things, and having that set up for you is very nice, even from a new user's perspective. It makes the barrier of entry of getting into KVM and getting into virtualization on Linux a lot easier, especially when it's all packed together in a nice package like Proxmox. The next piece of software we're going to be looking at after Proxmox is going to be our NAS solution. Our NAS solution that we're going to be going with for this project is going to be TrueNAS Scale. We're going to go with TrueNAS Scale because the hardware that I'm running this on does not like FreeBSD. I have a NIC that is not supported in the current version of FreeBSD, and probably it might not ever be. It's a random Broadcom NIC, but TrueNAS Core is based on FreeBSD, whereas TrueNAS Scale is based off of Linux. There's a ton of differences between these versions, but for what we're using them for, either one would work completely fine, since all we're going to be using is for NAS. Scale has a bunch of stuff built in for containers and Docker, Kubernetes, and stuff like that, I believe, as where Core doesn't really have all of that. It has its own jail system and all of that, but it doesn't have the same amount of support towards containers and things like that. So yeah, we're going to be sticking with TrueNAS Scale for this one. And in the future, we may do a video where I do this entire project where we use TrueNAS as the hypervisor and as the NAS solution, because TrueNAS also works pretty well as a hypervisor. The last two solutions that I like to offer are Ubuntu server and FreeBSD. These are for people that want to get a little bit more of their hands dirty. And in that case, this video is probably not really on the level that you would wish for it to be. With Ubuntu server, what it allows you to do is, since it has ZFS support out of the box, you can have that as your NAS, or you can set up KVM. KVM supported on Ubuntu, and so is ZFS. So it makes a pretty good base to roll your own solution if you want to build everything from the ground up and you don't want to really use a GUI or anything like that to manage stuff. It's a good solution, but you do need to know what you're doing before you get into this. So that's the reason why we're not going with it. FreeBSD is a similar thing. It uses Beehive and ZFS. And because it uses Beehive and ZFS and you have to work with the commands directly, we're not using it in this project because this is targeted towards people that are just now getting into HomeLab. However, it is a very good solution for somebody that is more advanced. Now for the hardware. There's some hardware suggestions that I have, but there's no concrete, this is what to buy, this is where you buy it solution for this. Most home labs that I've seen whenever you first get started are just made out of old laptops or old desktops that you had laying around. In my case, all of my home lab servers are old desktops. I play a lot of games, so I upgrade my gaming computer pretty often, and I just keep the parts, and there you go. That's where all of my home lab stuff has come from. But things like this HP Elite Desk 800 G3 Mini is a pretty good solution for $70. It gives you a, I believe, 4-core, 4-thread CPU, and if you ever need to look it up, you just go to the Intel ARC page, and then the Intel ARC page will show you all the information. So for instance, this one is 4 cores, 4 threads, as I thought, and it supports up to 64 gigs of RAM. Now you need to be careful when buying things like this this HP Elite Desk, in that whenever you Google this, you need to be able to look out for hardware, like the manufacturer issues that they have added to the product to be super helpful. Say for instance, this machine, if you go to its webpage and you scroll down, and you find out where it says memory supported, so it supports memory. This says it supports a maximum of 32 gigs of RAM, whereas the Intel ARC page says it supports 64. You need to keep an eye out for this. I believe things like this mini computer actually do support 64 gigs, but you do need to verify that. In this case, would I buy this with the expectation of it running 64 gigs? No, I'd buy this with the expectation of it supporting 32 gigs. And if it did support 64, then yeehaw, that's amazing. I'm so happy. But I would expect it to support 32. And if it supports 64, that's just icing on the top. This would be something good to start out at home lab. We're going to be using a newer model of this in this series to build out the home lab. It will be the machine running Proxmox and all of my Docker containers. Things like this Dell, just looking up Dell Micro PCs, these are pretty good too. And the reason why both of these are very good as opposed to using server grade hardware is because at home you're not going to want to spend a ton on your power bill. You're going to want to keep your power bill relatively cheap, and these don't pull a ton of power. They do pull a good bit, but they're not going to pull as much as say running an entire server, and they're also not going to be nearly as loud. Things like this are something to look out for. Now this, I do know the 6100T is a dual core processor. This is probably a little weak. You probably don't want to go to a dual core. You probably want to keep a quad or a quad core with hyperthreading, something like that. A 6-core with hyperthreading or a 6-core CPU is probably around where you want to be. But you can get some of these things for sub $100. A lot of this you really just need to research on your own and see if you can find good deals. The other option is, instead of going through eBay or something like that, is just asking family members, if you have them, to donate their old computers. I did this a lot when I first got started. I remember getting donated a HP from, I think, 2007 or 2008, and it being completely useless. But I also had a few times where I've had computers from 5 or 6 years ago that were donated, old laptops, and they had a broken screen, and fixing the broken screen was a good thing, or just taking off the broken screen, plugging up HDMI, and running it as a server is a good idea. Some other solutions you can look into are things like Synology Boxes. Synology Boxes are pretty good. They are a bit expensive, and this is what I'd consider something pre-built. What you would do with this is you would buy one of these, like this 2-bay, you would stick two discs in it, and then there you go. You would use that as your solution. Now, these would be running Synology's system. These are a solution I want to bring up, but I've never personally used any of these. I've just seen a lot of people that say that they're okay. If you were to use something like this, I would do a lot of research on it before I bought it, because some of these are very expensive, like $600 or $700 for, what is it, 5 disc, and one of those is a spare. So yeah, this would be something more of a NAS solution rather than a hypervisor, but I'm pretty sure some of these you can run some VMs and stuff like that on, so it is an option. Another option is Raspberry Pi. This is RPi Locator, and RPi Locator is a place where you can see where they are in stock and how much they are selling for. RPi Locator is pretty good if you need to find Pis and you really need them. This is the place to look. As of today, the Raspberry Pi 5 was announced, so that would be something cool, as long as the price of it comes out something reasonable. These are in stock at my personal Best Buy right now, but they're still like $170, and that's not worth it when I can just go buy a microcomputer for an i5, right, for $144. Spending $170 on a Raspberry Pi, not really worth it for a home lab. It's good for if you have some other small thing that you have to do, like running a 3D printer or some project that you want to do. That's fine. The next piece of hardware I want to look at are these Firewall Appliances. Now, I bought one of these to run Firewall, but some people also buy these to run Proxmox Zone. You can get some of these that are powerful enough that you could run Proxmox Zone and then also have your firewall built into it. I personally own one that should be fast enough for that, but currently I'm just using it as a firewall because virtualizing pfSense or OpenSense, not really something I'm looking into doing at the moment. Maybe in the future. These are also good solutions for their actual purpose, which is becoming a firewall. So those are good to look at. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend them as something you would buy just to put Proxmox on, because they are very expensive. Like, for instance, this is an i3. It's pretty recent gen, it's 11th gen. But why spend that much when I can buy this HP, for instance, for $70, and it's a 4-core, 4-thread, and yes, the other one will have better power efficiency and whatnot, but for the price for performance kind of thing, I believe that the used market with buying mini PCs is a pretty good place to get started. Is it a place to end? Probably not, but it's a good place to get started. Something like this is what we're going to be using today. I did not pay this for it. I got mine for free because I got it off of a friend. I had a friend that's work was getting rid of them, and I got it for free. So I just didn't get the hard drive, I didn't get Windows, and I didn't get any RAM, but I did get the CPU, and I did get the board, and I already had the RAM, and I just jacked a hard drive from something, and there you go. These are some of the systems that I have. These are old gaming computers. This is a very good way of doing it. If you're a gamer and you play a ton of like PC games, just save your old parts, build a rig out of it, right? Every generation that you upgrade RAM is pretty much an excuse to build another home lab server. For instance, where I went, I started out with this. This was one of my first gaming computers, and it was an i7-4790K. It had a 970. This isn't the exact motherboard. I have a gaming 5, and I have a water cooler, but this is roughly what it is. And whenever it got a little long in the tooth, I upgraded, and I upgraded to a 5600X, and this is what replaced it. And that was great. So now this became my Proxmox server or whatever. And yes, they do not have ECC. ECC is a nice thing to have, and it is preferred. It is strongly preferred. But if you don't care about your data a ton, and you're not going to die if you lose your data, you're not going to be insignificant headache if you lose your data. If you're just doing this to learn, having ECC is not necessarily at all if you are just doing this to learn. If you're doing this for a long-term storage solution, yes, please get ECC. If you're just doing this to learn things, ECC is not necessary. This is the NAS that we're going to be installing TrueNAS on. You can look at the hardware specs. It's not great. I wouldn't recommend copying it. It is very expensive, even for missing half the parts, because most of these parts are not available anymore. And the only thing worth copying would be the hard drives, and I'd probably see if you can get 8 terabytes, because they're a little bit better bang for the buck if you can afford them. The next one is what I upgraded to. I upgraded to a 5600X, and I've since upgraded from this. But this machine became another Proxmox node. I currently have, let's see, 3 Proxmox nodes, a NAS, and my gaming computer, my laptop, stuff like that. So I currently have 3 Proxmox nodes and a TrueNAS node, or a TrueNAS box. This is something you could replicate. I also don't highly recommend that because it's a pretty high price tag for what you get. This is what I run all my game servers off of and stuff like that, because it is a good bit faster than, say, an Elite desk. But as far as hardware, the thing that I was just not doing is I would not suggest looking up or buying, unless you get them for a really good price, things like the R720 or other large enterprise grade servers. Now, are they a good solution? Yes, they can be a very good solution. For instance, look at this one. It's $149 and it comes with 128 gigs of RAM. This could be great if you have a place to rack it, and if you have a place that is not going to annoy you. These are all housed a couple of feet behind me, so I don't want something super loud. So going with, mini PCs, and old gaming computers that are just as quiet as my newest one are a pretty good way of getting around that noise constraint. Also, generally, these older servers are pretty power hungry, especially if they're dual socket, and especially if they're running a bunch of HBA cards that are in them, and especially if they're running, a bunch of hardware that you're not 100% sure of. They're also a much older architecture, whereas something, say, like the Elite S Mini it's a couple of years old now, but it's not going to draw but 35 watts normally. And that's pretty good. So personally, I try to stay away from old server hardware. I try to use mostly consumer stuff, and Ryzen is a particularly good value right now. In that certain boards, you have to do your own research on this. I did not. I did this as gaming build primarily, and then after I got into home lab, this became a home lab build. But certain motherboards, you can get ECC memory that will work with Ryzen processors, and because of this, they are pretty good value on building your own server out of commodity hardware, just stuff that you can buy at Best Buy. Looking on eBay, OfferUp, stuff like that, checking for Craigslist and in places where people are selling these CPUs, say they upgraded from a 5600X to a 5800X or whatever. Sometimes they sell them on eBay or on, mostly not eBay, but mostly on Craigslist and stuff, local places. You can get them pretty cheap. I've seen people sell 5600Xs for like $80 before, because they upgraded and they just want to get rid of the thing, but they don't want to deal with eBay and they don't want to deal with whatever. So Craigslist, OfferUp, places like that are places to look. But if you can avoid it, the best way of getting started with your home lab is to not buy anything at all and to just use what you already have. Upcycle everything you can. If you have an old laptop that is good enough that you think you could run a web browser, a pretty heavy web browser with like 10 tabs in it, you should be fine to run some of these solutions. You should be fine to run some things. If you have a weaker one, then just skip putting Proxmox on it and use it as one node. Use it as what I would refer to as a virtual machine. Just use it as one of those. But Proxmox is not very heavy, so most of the time you can get away with putting Proxmox on it and a couple of VMs. The biggest limiting factor you're going to have is RAM, even on crappy hardware. Things like the Elite Desk that we're going to be putting this stuff onto, I think have 32 gigs of RAM in it, and I think that's about where it caps out. I haven't actually checked to see if it supports 64 because it has the same issue that I brought up earlier, where the Intel Arc says that it supports 64, but the HP website says it supports 32, and I just haven't pulled the trigger and bought more RAM to test it because it doesn't really need it. So that's kind of my hardware solution. It is use what you have. If you don't have anything, find something used, ask your friends, ask your family if they have anything that they can get rid of. If you can't get any of that, then look into buying some stuff. If you want to spend some money, do a ton of research and make sure you don't buy something that's bad for your solution. Everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different. Some people having a bunch of server racks is a great idea. For me personally, because all this has to be in the room with me, it's not a great idea because they get very loud and they produce a lot of heat. Most of the servers that I have are actually on Wake on LAN and they're off most of the day. The last thing I'd like to mention as far as hardware is to stay away from SMR drives when you can. There's many articles like this one from How to Geek or any of these. If you just Google or DuckDuckGo SMR versus CMR, saying exactly why SMR is bad, but generally the reason why is they're much slower for long sustained writes. And when you have a NAS, sometimes you'll have very long sustained writes, and that tends to get in the way. Performance is a big deal when it comes to SMR versus CMR. You definitely want CMR drives. They all, I believe, are labeled now. A few years back, Western Digital had a controversy where a lot of their red drives were SMR drives, from my understanding, and a lot of those people they didn't know they were SMR. They tried using them in their NAS because they were labeled NAS drives, and they had really bad performance. And then they found out, oh, this is an SMR drive. That's why it has really crap performance. And then due to that, most of them, they had a big backlash. Most of them are now labeled saying that they're SMR or CMR. You want to get CMR drives if you can possibly get them. SMR are fine in a pinch. They're good for archiving stuff, but it's not what you want to go after. You don't want to buy them. This whole controversy also, with SMRs being more prevalent, also killed shucking drives. Shucking was this thing that we used to do. And some people still do it, but it's less common. Where you would go buy, say, a 16 or whatever terabyte drive from Best Buy that was a MyBook drive. It was like one with the enclosure and everything, and it was made to hook up via USB. And you'd go home and you would shuck it out of its plastic container and get the hard drive out of it, and you would use that as a hard drive. And the reason why is because these drives were dramatically cheaper than just buying the same drive that you would pull out of this plastic this plastic box. So it was an efficient, a cheap way of getting really high end or really big drives for a cheaper price. And generally it was anywhere from 20 to 30, 40, 50 bucks cheaper to shuck your own drives than it was. Now it's not necessarily a good idea. You have to do a ton of research to shuck drives because of SMR drives. SMR drives, if you get one that's shucked, generally it's not a great idea. It doesn't end up being worth the money. So yeah, it's a better idea to just buy the CMR drives off of Amazon or Best Buy or wherever you prefer to shop to buy hard drives. It's also a good idea to get drives that are part of different batches, say ordering them at different times. That way, say for instance on Tuesday, Western Digital had some guy that messed up everything and those drives fell after a year. And then Thursday they were made, that same problem didn't exist, therefore your drives don't all fall at the same time. That's kind of the general idea. It's a little bit more in depth. You can do your own research about stuff like that, but yeah, generally speaking, stay away from SMR and order your drives from different places. It's a good solution. Buy a couple from Newegg, buy a couple from Best Buy, buy a couple from Amazon, that kind of thing. Buy them at all different times, whatever, in order to keep them from being all part of the same batch. Because sometimes you get a batch and all of them in that batch have the same issue and they all die about the same time. So it's kind of the idea. So that's going to be about it for this video. In the next video, we are going to be looking into provisioning the hardware with the solutions that I've mentioned in this video. I'm going to be using Bintoy to install both TrueNAS and Proxmox on 2 separate machines. If you want to follow along, you are going to need 2 machines or 2 VMs or however you want to do it. There's a couple of ways you can follow along. You can also just use one or the other and use TrueNAS to do your hypervisor, or use Proxmox and not have a backup. Either one of those are valid solutions if you're just learning. They're not great for if you're going to use this as a production environment. However, they work great for learning. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, leave comments. Tell me if I did well or if I did horrible, what I can improve on. Thank you very much. Bye.